I'd like to welcome everybody for attending and thank you very much for being with us today. My name is Dave Cassels, the President of the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform. I'm very pleased with the attendance today and the interest in our important work. I would like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. An important step in reconciliation is our acknowledgement of traditional land. The Coalition for Canadian Police Reform is a national nonprofit with one primary vision: to elevate the police profession in Canada. Our mission is to see the creation of a College of Policing uniquely designed for Canada and established by a special act of Parliament. The college would be responsible for the development of national, current and relevant training and education standards for all entry-level police officers, including a national certification protocol to be administered by the provinces. As many of you know, there have been many studies, reports, commissions, and public inquiries, including the most recent Mass Casualty Commission, recommending modernizing police education and research. And specifically, the Mass Casualty Commission recommended that Public Safety Canada work with the provinces and territories to establish a 3-year degree-based model for all police officers in Canada. Our mission is to see this come to fruition. Not bricks and mortar, but an entity similar to the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, responsible for the education and training of doctors. We are here today because many of you chose to hear the argument for a College of Policing for Canada. But we're also here today to remember the lives lost and the families left to mourn after the mass casualty trauma of April of 2020. The report and the recommendations of the Mass Casualty Commission must not be left to collect dust on a shelf. The Coalition for Canadian Police Reform would like to dedicate this webinar in honor of the victims, survivors, families, and the communities that were deeply affected by this horrific event. A video tribute will now be shown, followed by the introduction of our moderator, Dr. Scott Blandford, who will welcome and introduce our esteemed panelists. Please, John. Today's session is planned for no more than 19 minutes in length. I would ask that you participate in the discussion and submit your questions in the chat portion of the webinar. Our moderator will draw from these questions. I would like to now welcome and introduce Dr. Scott Blandford. Professor Blandford is a retired 30-year police officer who has held operational and administrative positions, including emergency response, criminal investigation, training, human resources, research and planning, where he developed a competency-based performance management, career development, and promotional system for the London Police Service. In addition, he has been an instructor and an administrator for several colleges and university programs focused on policing and public safety over the last 25 years. Scott is currently the coordinator of all undergraduate and degree public safety and policing programs at Wilfrid Laurier University. His research focuses on organizational development in public safety organizations and a competency-based recruiting and development of police officers. Scott, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dave, and I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this. I think it's a very important topic, and I'm happy to participate. And at this point, I'd like to welcome our esteemed guests and all of our attendees today to the Path to Professionalism, the argument of notable Canadians for Canadian College of Policing. As Dave noted, I started policing in 1982, and since that time, policing has undergone tremendous changes in service delivery, the scope of crime, the increased globalization, changing demographics across the country, increased oversight and expectations of our communities and our police officers. And as a result, there is a need for change and the opportunity to look at how we can move policing forward. So in order to set the stage for today, I think first off, we need to differentiate between what we mean when we speak about professionalism and policing as a profession. Professionalism speaks to the individual, the behaviors and the actions that they take in the delivery of policing to their communities. The profession speaks to the systems and structures that guide police organizations and also policing across not just the communities, but across the country to ensure there is standardization so that officers in Corner Brook, Newfoundland are delivering the same level of service as those in Vancouver in British Columbia. And I think that's a fair expectation of all Canadians to receive the best policing that they possibly can. So what we were looking at is how can we get to that level of profession within Canadian policing. So we've invited our esteemed panelists to take time from their busy schedule, which they've graciously done. And in order to help frame their presentation to you, we've asked three specific questions, and they may deviate from it, but this will help set some of the context. And the questions posed were, number one, do you believe policing in Canada has evolved into a true profession, and is policing ready for the creation of a Canadian College of Policing to contribute to that professionalization? The second question, if you support the creation of a College of Policing to further professionalism, how do you envision that developing? Is it going to be federally allocated or provincially, or is there a hybrid model that could work? And our third question was, should a Canadian College of Policing be a regulatory body overseeing certification for the right to practice, example, licensing and discipline, or should it be a governance body to help develop curriculum, content, training standards, and code of ethics and best practices for policing? Should the matter of discipline and licensing remain under the authority of the provinces and the individual police services? So we've asked each panelist to draw upon their experiences and to offer their thoughts to enhance these questions and really give us some insight from their perspectives. Now, we understand this is a very complex topic, and 90 minutes is really not enough to do it justice, but we hope we can at least advance the conversation in this webinar. Each panelist has been asked to present for approximately 8 to 10 minutes on the initial questions posed, and then we'll take 2 to 3 questions after each presentation. I ask that you keep your microphones muted, but do feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat. I will monitor those, and at the end of each presentation, we will bring forward a couple of germane questions and pose those to each panelist before moving on to the next speaker. So prior to starting with our first presenter, I'd like to first acknowledge that protocol would be that Chief Justice Tulloch should be the first to present. But he has graciously deferred speaking first to Justice MacDonald, given the connection to the Portapique incident, the Mass Casualty Commission, and the very moving video that we just watched. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the Honourable Michael MacDonald. He was appointed a Justice of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia in 1995 and became the 22nd Chief Justice of Nova Scotia and the Chief Justice of the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal in 2004. During his time sitting on both courts, he wrote approximately 500 decisions. And as a member of the Canadian Judicial Council for 20 years, he has chaired several of its committees. As Chief Justice in 2014, Justice MacDonald led the creation of the Nova Scotia Access to Justice Coordinating Committee and promoted several judicial outreach initiatives to engage the Indigenous and African Nova Scotia communities. His efforts to foster inclusion on the bench included creating a judicial mentorship initiative for African, Nova Scotian, and Indigenous lawyers, and he has volunteered with Phoenix Youth to host Justice Day camps for young people from racialized communities. In 2019, after retiring from the bench, he joined the law Stuart McKelvey in Halifax, and after the tragic deaths in the Portapique, Nova Scotia, he was appointed as the chair of the Mass Casualty Commission, which issued its final report in March of 2023. Very comprehensive document that I've gone through, and I'm sure he will expand upon that. So at this point, I'd like to ask Justice MacDonald to open up and his microphone and give us his presentation on those questions we've posed.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity. Most importantly, thank you so much for playing that tribute. I get emotional every time I see it. It's essential that we not forget those lives that that were taken. And just to expand a little bit on that, if I could, you know, evil visited a wide swath of rural Nova Scotia where families and friends and many beautiful little tranquil communities, a community like any community in this country, in any province or territory, and they were left permanently shattered. So I wanted to add, however, that in the ensuing mayhem, countering the evil that we experienced in the 13 hours, we in our commission discovered extraordinary acts of heroism and kindness that permeated our work. Everybody we asked to help gladly helped, and the kindness extended not just across Nova Scotia but across the country, and it continues to today. So every day up to and including today, we honor the lives taken, vowing that their loss and all the ensuing suffering must not have been in vain. So that's why I'm here today, essentially. That's why we all must do our part to see that our recommendations get implemented. And the specific recommendation we're talking about today is the one that has been quoted earlier. So I'll just I'll answer the first question right off the bat. I think policing is ready for our recommendation as it applies to education for police officers and continuing education for police officers. I think it, I'm not a constitutional expert, but there's a federal spending power and there's a provincial administration of justice under the British North America Act power. They coexist and they complement each other in many spheres, be it healthcare, or as I said, many spheres. So I think we're ready, and I think it's doable. I think it's constitutionally doable, and I think your third point about the independence piece, I would commend, although not on the agenda today. We talked about in our report, you know, the dynamic between police being accountable, obviously, to the people. But there's a role for the Attorney General provincially or the Minister of Public Safety federally, and that they can complement each other, provided there's a way that it's done in a transparent way. And we've set that out in our report. And another aspect of our report, which I would commend to you, which would include a slight amendment to federal legislation. But let me zero in on how I think I might be able to help the very important conversation today. So, from a very high level, we concluded that policing is an important subset of community safety, but policing isn't the be-all and end-all of community safety. Community safety is much more broad, much more complex, and what's really needed is to break down many of the silos and collaboration, and we've witnessed it throughout. So, for example, collaboration within police departments, collaboration among police departments, whether they be the RCMP and municipal forces or whatever, collaboration among first responders. More than police responded, fire and ambulance responded, and there needs to be collaboration among those. Perhaps most importantly, collaboration among community service providers, including mental health service providers, intimate partner violence service providers. That kind of silo breaking down and collaboration is essential. So we made a main finding in this regard, and concluded that the depot model of police training is inadequate to prepare RCMP members for the complex demands of contemporary policing, and the RCMP's failure to embrace a research-based approach to program development and police education, and its lack of openness to independent research impairs its operational effectiveness. And from that was a lesson learned. The existing Canadian standard of police training outside Quebec is inadequate to equip police for the important work they do and for the increasingly complex, and this is the point I tried to make earlier, the increasingly complex social, legal, and technological environment in which they work. The shortcomings produced by this approach have a disproportionate adverse impact on those who have been historically underserved by police, those who have been excluded from our institutions generally, but yet overrepresented in our prison populations. So the recommendation has already been stated, but it's brief. I'll repeat it for context, that the RCMP phase out the depot model of policing by 2032, and the RCMP consult with the Métis and the Saskatchewan Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations with respect to how the land and facilities should be used in the future. Public Safety Canada should work with the provinces and the territories to establish a 3-year degree-based model of police education for all police services in Canada. We were, in our work, and I commend the roundtable discussion where we discussed the Finnish model, and our website is well indexed and easy to navigate in terms of the various roundtables we held. But at volume 5, beginning at page 486, we talk about that and the Finnish model, and we heard from Kimmo Himberg, Professor Kimmo Himberg, and he described the relationship between police education and trust in police in the following way. In Finland, according to international measurements, public trust, citizens' trust to the police is the highest in the world. According to the latest police barometer, 91% of Finnish citizens trust the police a lot or close to that. Why is that? Our understanding is that one of the reasons is that we educate officers extensively. Basic police education leads to a bachelor degree in policing and takes 3 years. There is a lot of more theoretical and practical content in the program, and we put a special emphasis on values and attitudes in the education. He explained that it's both a University of Applied Sciences that follows the standards established by the Minister of Education, but it's also a police unit. So again, we're talking about collaboration and cooperation. And he added, we believe that modern policing as a profession is such a complicated spectrum of skills and knowledge needs that we need to have an extensive education which combines theoretical and practical aspects. That made sense to us and formed the basis of our recommendation. There are various implementation points which, Mr. Chair, I can get into, but I won't at this time. Happy to elaborate on them, but they're set out in our report. The bottom line is there's so much more to policing in the 21st century. We really need to address in a cooperative, collaborative, federal, provincial, territorial way that. And one final thing I'll say is we dedicated an entire volume 6, to implementation. So good for you, and thank you for working on implementation of a specific recommendation. But there's something there for everybody, and I would encourage you to review our volume 6 and see what else you can do to enhance implementation of all these important recommendations, so that the lives taken and all the pain and hurt and suffering will not have been in vain. So thank you again for this opportunity. Of course, happy to answer any questions now or later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justice. And I've read the document, and it is a very comprehensive document. And one thing that really struck me is I've read a number of reports that have come out of commissions, and the recommendations tend to be very high level. But what I found in this documentation was that the level and the depth of the implementation phases was very detailed. And it's essentially a roadmap for the move towards professionalization. So I commend you and your committee. It was a very well-written document and very comprehensive. I haven't seen any comments in the chat yet, but just as you were speaking, I have a couple of comments. And as you had noted, Finland model was looked at. The college university program in Finland was examined. And there, because they're a smaller country, they're able to send the officers to an actual facility. But how would you see it rolling out in Canada when we have such vast expanses of land and distances and time zones, et cetera, to deal with? How would that roll out? Would it be something that is done online, a hybrid model? Would you have regional centers? How would you envision that happening?
Well, first of all, just because it's complicated, and I know you agree with this, shouldn't be a reason for not doing it. So we've got the federal, provincial, complication, which is Canada, right? I mean, this is Canada, that we've been living with this and living well with it for a long time. In our report, we talk about, aligning with various universities, so regional universities, and I believe we indicated that at least one for Atlantic Canada and one for the Northern Territory. So what the wheel is invented in many ways. So you can certainly take the best from the existing police colleges and develop regional centers, obviously with a coordinated approach throughout. So and I think it was your introductory comments would be that we're taking in that you have to have consistency in policing. But geographically, this is a big country, and we talk about it in another aspect of the report that you can certainly deal with regional centers for that. And that could be cross-pollination as well, of course.
Yes. Now, I've experienced this in my own research, and I've heard this comment expressed by other chiefs. If we make this move towards a degree requirement for policing, how do we address concerns that we are marginalizing certain groups within our communities, certain marginalized communities? How do we make it available to all people so that there's a fair, playing surface across the board?
Through inclusion. I mean, you bring into the and our recommendations call for the implementation body that we recommend in volume 6 call for representatives of the Indigenous and racialized African Nova Scotian and racialized communities. That's a potential for richness. So this is not you need a PhD to get into university, a police university. This is beginning and bringing everybody into the tent. And in the design, you include those who have been traditionally excluded. I just don't see that as a problem whatsoever, honestly.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's a case, in my opinion, of we don't keep the bar artificially suppressed, but we create processes to bring in those marginalized persons so that we do level the playing surface for them. One question has popped up in the chat, and it's focused on technology. And the question is, what levels of digital literacy would or could be expected within a College of Policing or within a degree program? And are there any specific types of technology that should be focused upon, with the understanding that technology is playing a huge role in modern day policing?
Yeah, cutting edge technology, obviously. I apologize. I'm not able to give you the specifics of what actual type of technology, but surely the existing infrastructure can pick the best and research. You know, we are talking about a research, you know, a essential research component to this university training. And that, of course, would include not just the use of technology, but researching what is the best technology. But obviously, it should be cutting edge technology, and having officers adept at that. Again, great Canadians. I would envisage great Canadians as students and embracing the best in technology.
Yeah. Just one other question popped up. Speaking of silos, the corrections services require significant changes to training and operations to focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Both institutions, policing and corrections, deal with people in traumatic situations, but oftentimes not well. Do you see a potential synergy between policing and corrections?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all the players. Just let me give you an anecdote. It doesn't involve corrections, but in Portapique, there was a back road that nobody knew about, or none of the police officers knew about, but the Department of Natural Resources folks would know about that, but they weren't consulted. And that was a recommendation. Like, they should be consulted in a critical incident response. Think about who can help here. But I mean, to have a criminal justice system where the police arrest and trials are held and judges are involved, and then hit a full stop before they go to corrections is short-sighted, in my respect view. We didn't cover this in the report, so this is just a personal opinion. But if you're involved in the matrix of the community safety, including the criminal justice system, then there ought to be collaboration and sharing. I mean, you're dealing with enrichment there. Everybody wins when you collaborate. So I agree with that comment, although I hasten to add that that's a personal comment. It wasn't something we, you know, wasn't part of our, specifically part of our mandate at the Mass Casualty Commission.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we focus on in our programs here is interoperability and the ability to work collaboratively across the various disciplines within public safety. I do have a question from Mr. Nickel. I'm going to hang on to that question if you don't mind, sir, because I think it's one that I'd like to get all of the panelists to respond to. So I'll hold off on that question. So at this point, thank you, Justice MacDonald. Very appropriate comments, very insightful, and certainly help move the conversation forward. At this point, I'd like to now introduce our second panelist, and again, acknowledging his gracious deferment. We have Chief Justice Michael Tulloch, who I have had the honor of meeting and chatting with before on this very topic. So I was quite pleased to see him join us today. Chief Justice Tulloch was appointed the Chief Justice of Ontario and President of the Court of Appeal for Ontario on December 15th, 2022. Just coming up on his first anniversary. Prior to this appointment as Chief Justice, Justice Tulloch served 19 years as a judge, the first 9 years were as a trial judge on the Superior Court of Justice, where he first was appointed in September of 2003. And secondly, he served 10 years as an appellate judge on the Court of Appeal for Ontario, elevated in June of 2012. In 2016, Chief Justice Tulloch was appointed by the Ontario government to conduct important reviews, which resulted in 2 extensive reports. The report of the Independent Police Oversight, that was issued in 2017, and the report of the Independent Street Checks Review, which was issued in 2018. And I'm very pleased to have Justice Tulloch join us today and offer his comments on our questions. So, sir, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And I just want to say thanks to former Chief Justice Michael MacDonald for the amazing work that you've done and in Nova Scotia on your commission. And I just want to also say that your conclusions are exactly in line with the work that I did in Ontario on police oversight review, in which, Scott, you were a very instrumental contributor during our consultations. I think through this consultative process, I concluded that 100% police in Canada has evolved into a true profession, and in my view, it is ready for the creation of a Canadian College of Police and to contribute to professionalization. And I came to that conclusion based on both my consultations throughout the province, and I must add that during that process, we also attended, my team and I, some of them, also attended, as far as England to study their College of Policing system. I was lucky enough to have a former Chief of Police, Armin Labarge, on my team, who was pretty instrumental, in my view, in adding to the conversation and understanding of the complexity of policing. And I strongly believe that policing over the years has evolved from what I would say was a more static law and order type enforcement focused trade almost. I wouldn't even call it a profession. The way that it had originally came about to a full-fledged profession where we call upon the police to not only have an understanding of the communities that they're serving, but also to be versed in some of the sociological and psychological issues that people are dealing with. Some of the, a lot of the individuals that they come in contact with on a daily basis have mental health issues, and so the qualifications for de-escalation, it's no longer based on them calling upon skills where they use their guns or force, but they have to collaborate with other professionals within the medical field, within the sociological or social work field, and within community organizations to come up with systems to ensure that they're able to not only do their job, but also able to protect the communities that they're serving. So 100%, I think that, the police, the role that police play within our time is much more complex. And it requires, as a result, much more not just training, but education. In some of the conclusions that we were able to draw from our review was that many police officers, in any event, now have had some level of university training. The profession of policing is changing, and as one of the stats that we were able to to report was that by 1996, 2/3 of Canadian police labor force had some post-secondary education. So there have been some reports of police officers who have a higher level of education are perceived to act more professionally when conducting their duties and are the subject of fewer complaints. So the more standardized education is not only beneficial to the profession as a whole, but it's also beneficial to the individual police officers. And the way I see it is, like all other professions, that has evolved out of you know, a more, for example, and I'll give you an example for like nurses. There was a time that they didn't require a degree program for training. All they required was, I think, 2 or 3 years of college, community college. And in Ontario, in any event, the College of Nurses have increased the educational requirement so that that profession can be more professionalized. And it has only enhanced, you know, the profession in the way that they're viewed and in the way they're perceived and in the work that they do. It increases their responsibilities, in which nurses are now able to, in some cases, based on their levels of professional certification, they're able to dispense certain types of pharmaceutical medicine that they would not have been able to in the past. So as an analogy, I think that it only helps the profession of policing if they have more professionalization in their accreditation process. Another benefit from my perspective is that, you know, we are asked, the courts and the police, there's a clear intersection in the role that we do. And I started out my career as a former Crown attorney. And, you know, what struck me as a young Crown, as a trial judge, and now as an appellate court judge, is the fact that sometimes the courts, we rule on certain provisions of the criminal code, and you know, which directly impacts a police's role in their day-to-day duty. But there's often a disconnect in the time period for which the court judgments are utilized and implemented by the police, and I think that's a direct reflection of the amount of time allotted to the legal aspects of their training when they're within the current police educational process. Whereas I think if you had a degree standardized program, a legal training would be certainly an important element of that curriculum. One of the issues that was raised was what kind of technology would be utilized within this kind of training process. And I think that we now live in a technological age, and I think that, you know, any university, any educational institution is going to be at the forefront of new technology. And as technology increases, so do we expect our police services and police personnel to be abreast of the technology that's being utilized throughout the society at large, because we have to be one step ahead of the game. Now, in my view, and I've outlined in my report from 2016 a number of recommendations that I thought they're in line with Justice Michael MacDonald's recommendation that he did just recently. But you know, what we recommended was that there should be common and clear entry level academic requirements for police officers. And if we have a professional college, this curriculum could clearly be stated by the college. Work with educate, and how do we implement it in such a vast country? Well, I suggested that we work with educational partners to develop a curriculum, and you know, we could work with universities throughout the country that have the capacity to standardize these kinds of curriculum, the same as medical schools or law schools. We have them in different parts of the country, in different provinces, but there's clearly a standardized curriculum, certainly for law schools, that would give a basic level of education that would be required for any member who graduate from these programs to meet their bar exam requirements. So it's the same, in my view, the same kind of approach could be utilized in a college of policing. I suggested that we work to create a police culture that is more progressive and inclusive, beginning at the college level, and you know, that's where I think you know, police culture can be strongly influenced. One of the problems that I found when I did my review was that policing, the way that the educational process is now administered, you know, students, or new recruits, they go to Aylmer in Ontario for, I think it's 6 weeks or 6 or 12 weeks, I think. And they get their basic training. They then leave and they're dispensed back to the various services that they're in which they're hired. And then they go on the streets with a coach officer, most of whom are middle managers or people of the mid-level experience, a number of whom they you know, try to instill in them the pervasive culture of what's happening, you know, on the streets at that particular time in policing, which may be counterproductive to what we're trying to develop in terms of the educational process for police officers. So, you know, my view is that on a go-forward basis, it only is beneficial from a, you know, from a Canadian perspective, from a much broader perspective, from a public trust perspective, from the perspective of where, you know, the courts can feel more confident in the way that the rank and file officers on the streets are conducting themselves. I think they'd be more inclined to make less errors and so forth. So I think from a standardized perspective, it's much more beneficial to have a college of policing, and I think it will only be beneficial to us as a society, as a community, and to the police profession as a whole to do this.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Very good comments, and right in line with how I see things as well. Just going to draw upon two questions. One from Chief Steve Tanner. Good to see you again, Steve. It's been a few years. He's asked that formal education, specifically in policing, is difficult at a time when you're facing greater difficulty in recruiting and retention within police services. And when you consider the young age at which many young persons are graduating from high school and having to make that decision about post-secondary education, are they really in a position to make a good choice? And the question becomes, could it cause barriers in some way to potential police officers? And along with another question that came up, how would we address the situation of drawing people away from their homes and their families, et cetera, to attend this type of training, particularly on the national scale that we have?
Okay, so I'm really, I'm baffled to hear that you know, there's such a problem in recruiting young people into policing, because frankly, I think policing is a great profession. There's the danger element to it, I guess, that some young people may feel, you know, hesitant to embrace. But you know, it's like any other field. I think if you want to get into you know, for me to go in when I was trying to get into law school, you know, I started as a teenager as well. So you start the process right from day one, and it gives them an option, and it's not necessarily an exclusive option. Certainly, I think that you know, there are people that are that I don't see this as eliminating the cadet entry portal for young people. I think that they could go from being cadets into this kind of entry educational process. I don't think that it's and I don't think the fact that it's going to be a Canadian, like a federally administered program, it wouldn't necessarily, in my view, hinder them from taking a course within their province or within an area where they're I think we could create that so that it's locally accessible for them. And I also think that you know, young police officers are paid a significant amount of monies. I mean, most of them are paid $100,000 a year within the first, I think it's once they've hit first class. That's probably more than a lot of young lawyers are making, right? So I think it's how we market it, how we communicate to young people the benefits and the advantages of this profession. And that might, you know, it might call for us to be more creative in our approach to attracting young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. And just based on my experience, in ways police organizations shoot themselves in the foot in their marketing. They have the expectation that we're here and they will come. And I think it's just a case where we need to reach out more and show the benefits and the positive aspects of working in the industry. There was another question there, but I think it's a question that would be very aptly appropriate for the entire group of panelists. So I'm going to hold off on that question from Cal. And thank you, sir. I appreciate those comments. And at this point, I'm going to move on to our third panelist, who is joining us all the way from Ireland, hence the timing of our webinar today. Deputy Commissioner Shawna Coxon has joined us, and she's known for her commitment to continuous innovation and modernization in a rapidly changing, increasingly globalized world. She is currently the Deputy Commissioner of Strategy, Governance and Performance at An Garda Síochána, Ireland's National Security and Police Service. And I did have to practice that pronunciation. This is the only law enforcement agency in the Republic of Ireland, and it provides policing and state security services throughout the state. Prior to that, Shawna Coxon was a deputy chief of police with the Toronto Police Service, where she led 3 commands at different times: human resources, primary response, and communities and neighborhoods. Deputy Coxon has championed many innovations and is known for her work on the Transformational Task Force and for implementing the inaugural Computer Cyber Crime Unit. She has a BA Honors in Psychology, a Master of Arts in Criminology, and her PhD is in Law. She has been an adjunct professor at the University of Guelph for 17 years and joins us today from her home in Ireland. Welcome, Deputy Commissioner, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you. And good afternoon from Ireland, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, particularly with such an esteemed panel. So I wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation today, and in particular for playing you know, that video at the beginning. I actually hadn't seen that before, and I think it's really important to ground what we're talking about here and why we're here and why we're at an inflection point, I think, in policing internationally, but particularly in Canada. The 2 other speakers actually said a lot of what I was going to say, but if I could just share with you the Irish experience. So I moved in April of 2021 from Toronto to Dublin and became a deputy commissioner here. And the model for training here in Ireland is quite different and different than what I had experienced in Ontario. And so for me, it really put into practice many of the things that we're talking about today. There were 2 things that really struck me when I came here. First is that I'm not sure that Finland's is the highest trust level, but we're vying them for it. Our trust levels just went a little bit lower than they've been historically. They're at 90%. So 90% of the Irish people year on year, or more than that, say that they have high trust levels in An Garda Síochána. Interestingly enough, our training here is at one national college, which is in Templemore. And with that training program, we are partnered with the University of Limerick. So every guard, when you come to Ireland, and I hope you all do, because I see many old friends and colleagues here on this call, when you come here and you see any guard that is out there on the street that you interact with in any capacity, they all have, at a minimum, a BA in applied policing from the University of Limerick. And so I thought I would share with you a little bit of what that looks like for those of us who maybe hadn't experienced it. And I certainly didn't go through that model in Ontario. So you initially go to Templemore for 32 weeks. And I can talk a little bit about what that looks like. You're paid to go to Templemore, by the way. You're not paid a lot of money, but you are paid. Your university education is paid for by the government. So it's tremendous opportunity when you talk about communities that maybe wouldn't have access to education. We have very high interest rates in joining An Garda Síochána. So 32 weeks at Templemore, you get a 2-week break, 2 weeks vacation, and then you're deployed across the country to wherever you're assigned to be for 2 years. And in that 2 years, you're working as, you're no longer a student, now you're a probationer. And while you're on probation, just like we would have gone through in Canada, you're being assessed, you're working with coaches and mentors to help you through that process. And you do have some schoolwork. It's not terribly onerous. It's kind of built into what you do. So we do have single parents that do it, and we do have people who have academic challenges that are making their way through it. Once you're through the 2 years in the field, you have another 32 weeks on probation. And that second 32-week period would be after you've graduated from your BA program. So it's approximately 3 years to conclude your probationary period where you're finally a full guard. And at that point in time, you have a BA, as I said, in applied policing. The interesting thing here in Ireland is education is highly valued in the profession. I was stunned when I moved here to see how many people work with me or for me that have extremely high levels of education, because people really value it. So they go out and they get more. As an example, I represented the commissioner last week to go to the University of College Dublin. They do a master's degree in cybercrime. They have an international program. By the way, 2 officers from Toronto, historically when I was in Toronto, had taken this program. It's an international program. We have an MOU with them so that the largest number of students that they have are Gardaí. So we have a number of MOUs with universities across the country, more than a dozen. I think it's about 15. And again, I think it really does speak to what Chief Justice Tulloch was saying with respect to police culture and the way that we view things. And I'll just share my own personal experience on this. There were a number of things that I assumed to be true when I moved to Ireland, because you have, I had at that time 25 years in policing, so there's just things that you think you know. And then you come to a place where people have different ideas, different values, many of which are the same as mine, but some of which were different. And so this really challenged me regarding what education could look like. And I do think it is key to one of the reasons why the trust rating is so high here for An Garda Síochána with the general population. So I think professionalization is really important. So you can understand my answer to the first question is yes, I do think we need some sort of a government college. What I would say is one of the reasons I was attracted in coming to Ireland in the first place was that I was involved in a massive change program in policing here. It's, I think, the largest change program in policing in the world. So when I came here, my job, one of the things I oversee in my job is that change program. It's had close to 200 different projects in it. But the interesting thing about that program is I report directly through the commissioner, of course, but up to the Taoiseach, which is the prime minister here. So it's a whole of government approach. And it's the one thing that concerns me with respect to implementation of the Mass Casualty Commission. And I don't know how others on the call feel about it, but when you have a whole of government approach and you're sitting there with different departments together collectively, coming up with solutions, being held to account, because there's certain things I can't get done if the health department isn't on board. There's certain things I can't get done if we don't have money. So how much money is there and why, and what does that look like in the larger government budget? So I think that whole of government approach is really successful and important. And it was one of the things that attracted me to coming here. And we're going to have a report in Q1 of this year coming up regarding the end of that transformation program, because we're nearing the end of it now. The last couple of things I just wanted to say is that I don't necessarily think this is just a question of professionalization and standards in policing. I actually think it's a question of values in society. And I say that because, I've had these conversations with people, particularly when I was here. What do we do when we have a recruitment program that's maybe not going as well as you might have thought? Well, what I would say to that is it is short term, because people need to see value. It is the big differentiator for Gen Zs. They need to see value in their work. We have huge value to offer people in policing, but they don't see it. And they don't see it. I don't think it's a matter of advertising. I think it's directly connected to how people feel about policing. So when public trust levels are low, you're going to have difficulty recruiting people into the profession. We've had two national, and I'm calling them national, there's only one campaign here in Ireland since I arrived for recruitment. The first one had over 10,000 applicants. The second one had close to 5,000 applicants. So many of them aren't going to get through, but there's massive interest in policing here in Ireland. And the other thing is, I was reflecting a lot about nursing as well, and I'm so glad that Chief Justice Tulloch brought that up. My cousin is a nurse, actually, and I'm very proud of her and the work that she's done. She went through that model where you didn't have to go through university. And there is a massive shortage in nursing right now, right across Canada, and in Ontario in particular, because that's what I tend to follow. And no one's having the conversation around, maybe we should drop the standards. Maybe we could just remove the need for education. So I think we have to stop and reflect on, what does that mean in terms of our values? Why is that so important now to keep in the nursing profession? Why would nobody dream of, giving that up? Instead, they're talking about, bringing people in from other countries, looking at, making Canada a more attractive place to bring people into. So I think we just have to be mindful of what that means. And the other thing in terms of values, I just wanted to mention before I close is just that, I always hear people talk about, well, is it a matter of, is academics, or is it tactical, or is it physical training? And if we give up one, then we won't have more time for the other. I certainly came into the profession as someone who didn't have a lot of tactical or physical training, and I've gotten most of my education after getting on the job. But actually here, the standards are that you get all of the above. Like, it's very interesting to think that you have to give one or the other up, because the value system in Canada is that the time frame must be short. So I think that we need to challenge ourselves about raising the T's and C's in the profession, so that will attract more people, and really looking at what professionalization can look like. I know there were two other questions with respect to how to get this done. And I think it does need to be a regional model. I think some of it will have to stay at the provincial level. However, I do think that, and I'm from a model now here in Ireland where we have a code of ethics. You have a governance that remains at a higher level that we need to adhere to. So I would say that that would work well in Canada. And then you could have other things that are actually implemented in different regions. But certainly you need that high-level standards and governance approach to be up and outside of the provinces, and then others can implement it so that we have some level of standardization. The other thing that was brought up at the beginning, and no one's really talked about it on this call, but I do think that we need to consider things like promotions and discipline and look at them outside the organization as a sidebar, but related. Here in Ireland, we have an ombudsman, so many of our investigations are done outside of An Garda Síochána into members, and our promotional processes into particularly the higher ranks in the organization are all done by government. So you'll only have one person on the panel who's from within the organization, and that's some of the pieces that have been involved in the reform process here. So those are just some of my thoughts today. I do think it's all possible, and I think it really is the time for us to look at how we can do this and to come together for the profession that we all love, that I'm very proud to be a part of, both in Canada and now in Ireland, and look at ways that we can make it even better. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And you know, it's so interesting to hear it from the international perspective, especially someone who has been on both sides in the Canadian context and now in the Republic of Ireland. So thank you for those comments. Some interesting thoughts. Certainly, there's been some very interesting questions that have been popping up, and if I can just head to a couple of them. This can be for all of our panelists. It comes from Mr. Nicol. Universities across Canada have some skills in their criminology programs that already exist. But he is asking about how are we going to implement this when we have the constitutional level, and Deputy Commissioner, I think you touched on it a bit, with the provinces and the division of powers under Section 9192 of the Constitution Act. If there's a federal component to policing for national security and federal legislation, how do we incorporate the provincial and municipal level into this and their responsibilities? And we know we have the Commission comments related to the RCMP, which is at a national model, but how do you translate that and bring that down to the provincial and the municipal level? And he followed that question with, have we looked at what is happening in the UK and Scotland, where they follow a constitutional model with the UK College of Policing, which I've had some involvement with. So how do we shape it? And I think you touched on it, Deputy Commissioner, at the provincial and federal level.
Yeah, I think the UK model would work well here for that. You know, you look at how they've standardized processes. So, you know, Scotland has its own college, as an example. You know, the Met has their own college, but they're all adhering to standards that are held by, you know, the National College of Policing across the UK, right? So, you know, you can have high-level standards and then they get implemented differently, but there is a standardization of approach, and people will cycle in and out of different positions at the College of Policing, so that way the standards are being held, and then they go out and they actually look at what's happening in the different police colleges and the training centers across the UK. The other thing of interest, and again, something I wasn't accustomed to, like, you don't become a deputy or a number one in an agency in the UK unless you've gone through the strategic command course. And you have to apply to try to get into it. There's standards you've got to get. And then once you're into the program, you have to pass the program. By the way, there are people that don't pass the program. It's a very intensive, several months long program. And I went last year, we had 2 members graduate from An Garda Síochána. So again, standardization of approach, something that is centralized, you know, in terms of governance and standards, but decentralized in terms of application. And I think that speaks to the heart of, like, what do you do if you're a single mom? How do you necessarily go to a police college that's far away? So the models are out there. They exist already, and I don't think they would be difficult to implement in Canada.
Good, thank you. Other panelists, any comments or thoughts? Okay, I'll move on to another question. This is something that actually is near and dear to my heart, in that one of the commenters talked about, and particularly Justice MacDonald, you spoke to interoperability between the various disciplines. And the question was, given that policing is not necessarily the lead anymore when it comes to community safety, would a college of public safety or community safety that encompasses all of the various disciplines within public safety be an option or a thought, or should it remain strictly as a policing college?
It's a great concept, something worth exploring, whether it's a police-centric university that embraces all the various constituencies that I've recommended, or whether it starts with community and embraces police. That's certainly worthy of discussion. Where we landed was actually in our recommendation, but it's motivated by the fact, and I think my very first remarks were that policing is a very important integral part of community safety, but it's a subset of community safety. It's not the be all and end all. And I would answer the question simply by saying that, our recommendation speaks for itself, but our other variances worthwhile? There's certainly discussion about them would certainly be worthwhile. Would certainly say that much.
Certainly. Justice Tulloch?
Yeah, so I think policing as a profession is such, it's at the forefront of public safety, and I think everything else is almost a subset of the police and the role the police and holds within the communities and within the society at large. And so I think even the situational tables that have been set up in various communities, the policing aspect or the policing presence is pivotal to the success of any of these tables. And so I would say that the university or the College of Policing is important, as opposed to losing the policing identity within the greater integrated approach for public safety, a College of Public Safety or so. We have criminology programs in various universities and so forth that really, they don't emphasize the role of police, and they're more critical of the role that policing plays. And I think what we need to do is to highlight and professionalize the policing as a profession. And so that's why I think for us to have a College of Policing, it's important, because it takes a very prominent role that we as a society see policing as, and we want to encourage that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we've noticed. We have a criminology department here at Laurier, but our policing programs are separate from them, because we do recognize that differentiation between them. And we have also built a Bachelor of Arts in Public Safety as well, because we recognize that need for interoperability. Commissioner Coxon, any comments, thoughts on that?
Just that I don't think it's just policing. I think that where we're seeing the most value is in society is when there's an integrated approach, right? Like, we all know we need upstream solutions that, a lot of times what we're dealing with in public safety is so far downstream, it's a huge challenge, right? So I would very much welcome anything that allows for more interoperability. I know that certainly that's been recommended in the past in Ontario. So again, a previous recommendation that just hasn't been implemented. But there are other ways to do it as well, including looking at tackling specific challenges working in the 3 Ps, with academics and private sector to see where changes can be made. But we certainly just need to find ways to build that into the system, because right now the system is siloed, and that's a bigger problem that we need to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Probably best directed to Justice MacDonald. A question came forward from Andrew for Chief Justice MacDonald. What evidence do you see that shows the RCMP and government are actually adopting the report's recommendations concerning improving policing? And by extension, that question could also extend to Justice Tulloch.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. I'll harken back to our volume 6, which talks about implementation, and we have recommended, which has been struck, a monitoring committee. That a monitoring committee be struck with representation by family members who were the the reason why the inquiry was created in the first place. A strong voice that has to continue to be heard. So representatives from there, representatives from various constituencies. That has been struck. It's being chaired by a former colleague of mine on the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, former Justice Linda Lee Oland. And my knowledge is no greater than anyone else on this call. Just what I am able to glean from that, but certainly was happy to see that that particular recommendation was upheld, because that's or adopted. That's the fulcrum or the basis for all the other recommendations to be done, because it is a monitoring committee, and that is underway. And again, I don't have any inside knowledge and I only have the access to various media and internet sources that everyone else would have.
Thank you. Justice Tulloch?
Right. So I think that leadership is critical to any kind of implementation. And I think, police and leadership, the associations of chiefs of police, but also, I think one of the beauty of your profession is this, right? You have some really deep experience in former chiefs, and they're highly respected, in my view, and I think they've been critical to set in the path for some of the people that are now chiefs of police, and I think that they need to create a voice so that the government can, listen to them and make the implementations that are necessary to better the profession. Because frankly, I think it's in everyone's best interest, and for us to sort of move in the direction that experience shows is beneficial to not only the profession, but to the society at large. So I think, leadership from within is really important. I think the government, they will, or I'd hope that they would listen, but there has to be a push from within the profession for any meaningful change to be made.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as Commissioner Coxon has indicated, it's the whole of government. It's the political will and the resources to bring about that change. So many great questions here. I'm trying to go through them, and obviously we do not have enough time. But the one question that I'd like to combine with two is a College of Policing is not a panacea to what ails the profession here in Canada. So they'd be interested in panelists' observations of the continued need for strong and effective civilian oversight, a transparent and robust system of accountability, and inspired and insightful leadership. And I'll piggyback that with another question with the recent changes that came about in Ontario, where the government has pulled back from the requirement for a post-secondary education, contrary to what earlier recommendations had been, and that was supported by the Ontario Chiefs of Police. So how do we create that political will and change that what I think is a regressive direction. Anyone care to respond?
Sure. I'm glad we started with an easy one. So a few thoughts. I think the profession, I think I'm in the same place as everyone else, I think, on this call, in the sense of I'm concerned about the profession I love right now. We are at an inflection point. I was having a cup of tea a week ago, and yeah, because that's what I do in Ireland now, I have tea, with somebody from the US who was saying that if you were at Major City Chiefs this year, it's a table of 72 police leaders, right? So 72 police leaders from police services of 1,000 or more. And of that table of 72, in the last 2.5 years, 70 of them have changed over. So you have a different person sitting there in the leadership position. So you have massive amounts of change in leadership. There's not a lot of corporate knowledge remaining. So a lot of things that have been done historically are now they've been undone. Now they're seeking to redo the same things. So I think there's a lot happening in the profession, and a lot of it's happening unintentionally, but it's happening kind of to us in many ways. So I'm all for civilian oversight. I do think it's really important. Certainly, one of the things that I did want to mention is one of the things I like about the Irish model. My position was created for change. The idea that you would have somebody at the command table who is responsible for recommendations going back years. And I've done an assessment here to look at what kinds of recommendations haven't been implemented, why, get tracking on that, looking at what we can do. I ultimately report to a lot of people who aren't in the policing space. And so I do think there's benefit to that. I'd love to see the RCMP, for example, come up with a model like that, because you need someone at the top table who's actually just doing change. I do other things too, but it's probably the largest lion's share of my work. And I think that with respect to leadership right now, we need leadership more than ever. I totally agree with what you said, Scott, around, the deep experience of police leaders who have recently left the profession, who care deeply, who want to get involved. I just think it's going to require systemic change. So we have to look at, who actually has capacity. And I'm not talking about the number of people. I'm talking about, power to create the changes that are required. And that is a whole government approach. It really is. There's just some initial thoughts. Thank you.
No, very good.
I can volunteer if you want, Chief Justice Tulloch, to go next, or?
Yeah, I mean, either of us. I'm good if you want to go, Mike.
You go ahead, Chief Justice.
Okay, so I did an entire review on civilian oversight of policing, and I think it's critically important to have a robust civilian oversight system in order to instill community confidence in policing. And I think that the police services and the police profession is as good as the communities that oversees them, and really the way that the financial allocation of resources is set up. It comes directly from the local municipal governments, and they have a responsibility to establish the police services boards, and there's a politicized process that goes into play there. But one of the problems, I think, with that model is that a lot of the people that are on these oversight bodies, they're not necessarily the best people. They're not trained in governance. They don't necessarily understand the policing institution or profession. And so I think that it's really important then for police and leaders to work, when I say leaders, like chiefs and their, executive teams, to work in conjunction with these oversight bodies to ensure that the best interest of the organization is being advanced, and that public and community trust is being instilled. Because without that, I think that we lose as a society, and the profession also loses its credibility. So it's very important from my perspective to have some oversight that is strong and robust, and you can't have it without the support of the leaders within.
Completely agree. Justice MacDonald, we're down to the 2-minute warning.
I'll be very brief. One of the most gratifying aspects of our difficult work was witnessing the wonderful work that can be done by communities, and we dedicated an entire volume to communities, so and policing and community safety, and yeah, all of the above. Strong, robust, independent oversight bodies are important, and we do address. This goes back to the Marshall inquiry in Nova Scotia, the role of the Attorney General and the role of police when it comes to investigative independence. And we address that, and I commend that in our report. There has to be clarity and transparency, but again, it's about balance, independent oversight committee, but that also respects independent and investigatory independence. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, sirs. And Deputy Commissioner, clearly, this is a topic that can generate a lot of passion, can generate a lot of ideas. Just reading the questions and the comments in the chat room have just been phenomenal. I wish we could actually spend the time to answer and discuss these more in detail. Some great people in the chat room, and also to our panelists. We wish to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll just finish this with saying that we thank you for your participation, and we hope that we've opened up the door to further conversation and certainly a lot of idea generation. And it is a holistic approach. It does involve the community. It involves the will of government. It involves strong leadership within policing and within academic institutions to make the necessary changes, I think, to move us forward into the next generation of policing. So with that, I'm going to thank our panelists and all of our guests. I'm going to turn it over to Dave Cassels just for some closing comments. But thank you very much for your participation today, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Justice MacDonald, I believe you have a closing comment.
Oh, I just wanted to. No, I think that was Ron MacDonald has a hand raised, not Michael MacDonald.
I'm sorry. My mistake. Scott, let me just thank you so much for your moderating. I just want to add a comment raised by all three of our esteemed panelists, and that is the interest, the motivation of the police chiefs across the country. Justice Tulloch has raised it. Shawna's talked about how in the United States, the turnover with the executive level is probably extreme, and I think it's similar in Canada. A recent conversation I just had with Angela, who's on this call, the chiefs that are turning over in Canada are also very, it's moving quicker than I would think it should, especially in our occupation. But I still have confidence in the CACP and the chiefs that are there that if they recognize the benefit of a college, they have the ability to influence the public safety minister. They have the ability, as the recommendation coming from Justice MacDonald, to create a college and begin to set national standards. So I do believe that we have the leadership. I just hope that they find the initiative to do it. I must thank all of our esteemed panelists very much. For our coalition, this means a lot to us. One of our roles is to get the message out. And the more that are involved in the conversation, the more your recommendation 105, particularly 105B, Justice MacDonald, will be implemented. And I'm hoping Justice Linda Lee Oland sees the importance of it. I want to thank Scott again for doing an excellent job. I want to also thank my Vice President, John Lilly, who helped us with a lot of the technical issues, as well as Hannah Steffes, who is on the call with us today, and our Secretary, Dennis Shep. This is an important issue. I would hope that you will all take it to heart as we move forward. Continue to support our coalition. It means a lot to me. And I will leave by saying I'd like to wish everyone a safe and enjoyable holiday season. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe, everyone.
Thank you.